Remakes are a topic that I'm pretty sure everybody at this point has some sort of strong opinion about, given their ever-growing presence in modern media. Whether you think they're all superfluous and people should just learn to appreciate old and flawed media as it is, you believe they're necessary opportunities to introduce classic works to modern audiences, or you fall somewhere in a more critical middle, it is pretty much impossible to not think about them now. Personally, I have complicated feelings in the matter, but I believe that at their best, they represent an opportunity for artists to go back to something in their past, critically re-examine it, and improve on what exists to create something that stands by itself as a fascinating piece of art, neither replacing the original or being stripped of what made it interesting. And I believe perhaps one of the best examples of this is 2010's SubaHibi. SubaHibi is a game that needs no introduction to many people watching this video. It's a title of an intensely passionate fanbase translated into 5 different languages, brilliantly mixing modern-day otaku culture and late 2000s internet brain poisoning with impressive philosophy and psychological horror to create one of the most thought-provoking, fascinating, and considered experiences within the entire visual novel medium. And for certain, it's the most realized work in the nebulous genre of Denpa, a vaguely defined offshoot of psychological horror characterized by delusion, social isolation, and disconnection from reality by people on the English internet. Whether it actually means that, though, is a little bit debatable. As I've talked about in all my prior videos on Denpa games, the term originates from a mockery of people who believed in 1980s 5G radiation-esque conspiracies, and then evolved into a loose genre of free games pinpointed as the core of its aesthetics, the creators of which are all utterly baffled by the label. Despite all my critique, however, even I can't deny this. SubaHibi is, if nothing else, Denpa by any definition you conjure, and it fucking rocks. I could gush for ages about how much I adore it in everything, from its endearing and well-fleshed-out characters to its incredible messaging, which distills massively complex concepts in everything from mathematics to classic philosophy into something digestible by and meaningful to any reader. And perhaps in the future I'll do a video series on exactly what it means to me and why I love it so much. But it's important to know that the story of cults, traumas, curses, and blessings that so many readers love wasn't born out of thin air. Its lineage goes all the way back to the very first game that KeroQ and its sister studios like Makura developed, back when they were little more than a couple of university folks. Before we had genre classics like SubaHibi and Sakura no Uta, we had one very special game in 1999 that stood apart from everything else in the era. Released in 1999 exclusively for Microsoft Windows in Japan, and receiving a fan translation to English in the near-ish future, Tsui no Sora, translating to End Sky, follows a haunting week and a half of events in an unsuspecting Japanese school, as the passing of one of its students, Zakuro Takashima, sets off a chain of events that quickly escalates from murmurings of the world coming to an end to a pseudo-religious mass suicide event led by one Takuji Mamiya. Except, though that may be how people like Yukito Minakami and Kotomi Wakatsuki see it, the perspective of those who suffer the most reveal a different side of the world, and fears of a mysterious end sky coming to doom us all. Tsui no Sora is a difficult game to talk about, to say the least, if not just because of the utterly bizarre legacy it left behind. While the other 2 games that went on to influence Denpa were commercial failures, Tsui no Sora, unlike the previously covered Sayo Oshi and Jisatsu 101, was by all accounts a success, with lead writer Skaji describing it in an interview as having flown off the shelf. Its fame and infamy propelled by players at the time flaming KeroQ online for making such a bizarre and brutal title. The desire to play the game presumably only grew as KeroQ evolved as a studio in the edoge space, which led to them deciding to remake it in the 2000s. That project ballooned in scope to become SubaHibi, and subsequently whatever legacy TNS had got overshadowed by it now being known as the SubaHibi prototype, with few rushing to defend it as anything else. Even Skaji himself seems to hold to this stance, who considers the writing of the game to be an immature, embarrassing, and primitive work of a university student. And thus it's been buried not only by SubaHibi, but by a far more direct remake in 2020, which stays faithful in places while massively overhauling, recontextualizing, and expanding the story in others. It also has 2 of the most made-for-me age scenes that I've ever seen. God bless Skaji's incredible level of shameless horniness. Swelling boobs and cute girl cocks aside, Tsui no Sora's history begs anybody attempting to discuss the game to ask themselves how they should even go about that. Do you talk about it as only a precursor for what was to come, as the first game part of a legendary Denpa horror trilogy which its creators don't consider an accurate label, or do you discuss TNS as a standalone work in need of isolated examination? Because in all honesty, for as much shit as Skaji gives himself, and as much as I have problems with this game, I don't think it's a disaster that some people make it out to be. It's definitely messy, with questionably developed characters, unrealized philosophical ramblings, inconsistent artwork and aesthetics, insensitive depictions of sexual abuse, a terribly implemented soundtrack, and a game engine that never worked well, most certainly not in 2025. But despite all of its flaws, Tsui no Sora is still a KeroQ game, and much like the modern-day masterpiece releases that are Sakura no Uta and SubaHibi, it warrants discussion for what it tries to say. Rather than combat hopelessness like SubaHibi ultimately attempts to, Tsui no Sora embraces the pain and suffering of life with reckless abandon to show hypocrisies in society, the emotional drain of modern life, the desire to find meaning through any means necessary, and to show what little glimpses of good which exist in our cursed and blessed lives carry meaning. It is far from perfect, but it's also far from a mere blueprint that many people make it out to be. A flawed, messy, and even immature work of art that captures a specific feeling and sentiment better than perhaps anything else related to it. So in this video, I want to engage with it as it is rather than what it became, just as I want to engage with the people who sponsored this video, Very OK Vinyl. Vinyl records and video game music. Two awesome things that go together like peanut butter and jelly, or your regional equivalent thereof. In recent years, there's been plenty of record labels and game studios realizing the potential of getting classic scores available for the old turntable, and in my opinion, there's really no one doing a better job of this than Very OK Vinyl. Since 2018, the Ontario-based record label has been working with developers and individuals alike to bring game and indie music from all eras to analog disc, with a particular focus on works from Japanese developers and those inspired by them. From modern hits like Steins Gate and Style no Uta, the vintage classics like Rusty and Cyberblock Metal Orange, and from VTuber Obi Katie Cat's debut album to Vocaloid albums like Demon Doll, Very OK Vinyl has an incredible and wide selection of amazing works to choose from, with more coming out all the time. Perhaps one of their coolest upcoming releases among many is the soundtrack to Pseudo Regalia, the N64-inspired action platformer that took fans of the genre by storm in 2023. With over an hour of incredible tunes that are nostalgic yet fresh, they are a blast to listen to whether or not you've played the game, making for a release that you do not want to miss. So head on over to veryokvinyl.com and secure your copy while supplies last, because they are limited. And while you're there, why not check out their gigantic selection of records from all sorts of distributors and in all sorts of genres. In addition to tons of game scores for famous and obscure titles alike, they've also got everything from the scores to famous anime like Death Note and the Gundam films to modern day city pop records straight from Japan, so there's bound to be something for you or a music lover in your life. As always, I have to give a huge thank you to Very OK Vinyl for supporting this channel. They were the first folks to ever sponsor me, and to this day I've had nothing but amazing experiences both with their products and working with them. So again, if you love video game music and vinyl records, then head on over to veryokvinyl.com and check out the amazing things they have in store. And with all that said, I think it's time to strap in and embark on Mamiya's wild ride. Let's go and see what lays in store for us all at the end sky. July 1999. Though it seemed to be a month like any other from the view of an average person in Tokyo at the time, it was anything but for the students and faculty of a certain high school. On July 13th, 7 days before summer break was set to begin, a sudden announcement shocked everyone there. A fellow student, Sakura Takashima, has passed away by suicide. Though students exchanged fake tears and lowbrow jokes over her passing, whatever they may have been feeling soon grew to fear when rumors about her death and the things she said prior to began circulating. Most frighteningly, that the world is set to end on July 20th. Of all the students, these rumors strike the most fear and motivation to Takuji Mamiya, a traumatized target of bullying who sees Sakura's proclamation as prophetic and her suicide as a cataclysmic event, quickly shedding his timid exterior and developing cult leader-like charisma to save everybody. Through this, in a potent, emotional speech delivered impromptu in class, Takuji gathers almost all the other students to a cult under the guise of being led to a newer, greater world, for the apocalyptic event known as the Tsui no Sora, or the End Sky. Almost all, that is, except for the quiet and moody wise guy Yukito Minagami and his bright, chipper childhood friend Kotomi Wakatsuki, who question and rebel against Takuji's suicidal philosophy. Except, though that may be how those two see it, the world is not the same for everyone, and there's far more depth to the events than Yukito's point of view would have one believe. Complicated and troubled past, hallucinations and delusions induced by fear and suffering, people who appear to inhabit a different plane than all the rest, and far more than meets the eye lays beneath the horrific and surreal events that transpired from July 9th to July 20th. What led to Sakura's suicide, and what caused her to believe the world was ending? What changed Takuji so suddenly, and why were so many willing to believe in a clearly suicidal ideology? And was the world truly fated to end on the 20th, or did it turn out to be mere conjecture as the prophecies of those like Nostradamus were? There was no way to unravel it all but to see the world as the foremost involved in the events see it, and to learn how truly broken our world is. Something that I believe immediately stands out about Tsui no Sora compared to the other two Denpa Big Free titles is how immediately gripping the narrative is simply as, well, a narrative. While Sayo Oshi relies heavily on vibes and grotesque absurdities to rather successfully grab the viewer in lieu of a clear narrative, and Jisatsu 101 feels enchantingly nonsensical for the first half hour, Tsui no Sora is straight and to the point. Yukito is a normal guy who goes to school, finds out a classmate took her own life, and everything gets wacky from there. It's clean, direct, and incredibly captivating, with the kind of rapid-fire pacing common in 1990s eroge. Except, unlike some contemporaries it was inspired by, such as Shizuku, the game actually keeps the pace up throughout almost the entire experience. Even when the structure and design of the narrative falls apart somewhat in the middle half, it still feels at least like it's always moving places and attempting to keep the viewer engaged through interesting musings and clever plot beats. It helps too that the structure was pretty novel for when it came out, rather than the story being split into distinct routes as was becoming common thanks to giga hits like Canon and Yuno changing the medium forever. Tsui no Sora is segmented into 4 viewpoints. You see the events of the story for Yukito as a logical layman, Kotomi as the incidentally involved passerby, Sakura as a victim in the days leading up to her passing, and Takuji is the cult mastermind and arguable villain of the story. If you have played SubaHibi or the 2020 remake of Tsui no Sora, then all of this likely sounds familiar to you, as should the emphasis on using these viewpoints to explore how reality is something highly subjective. To this day, it remains one of the most unique takes on the multi-route structure in all the visual novels, and I really can't think of much in the entirety of gaming that takes a similar approach besides the original Half-Life and its 2 expansion packs. Unlike Half-Life, however, the arguable protagonist of Tsui no Sora speaks quite a lot and has a lot of musings about the world. As the point of view for the first chunk of the game, Yukito as a character lays the foundations for where the story goes and what it attempts to explore. A grumpy but caring guy who goes through the day-to-day life as a well-adjusted person, musing on the mundanity and purpose of the world and society in between bouts of playing around with his childhood best friend, Kotomi. As the lead for the fan translation project of the game describes it, he's someone that, quote, reads like he has a lot of faith in humanity, but not a lot of faith in people, unquote. And this makes him pretty compelling to follow through his view. It's clear beyond his rather cold and disinterested exterior that he has a lot of care for the world and people, but everything from the mundanity of life to the reactions towards Zakura's passing make it hard for him to apply that in any practical terms. After all, how can one feel any confidence in others when they seem to move through their days like drones and react to death as if it's a joke? Many of the best moments in this story come from him being able to flex his philosophical muscles and genuinely attempt to work through this with himself and others, drawing heavily from people like Wittgenstein and especially Nietzsche, which Skaji himself has said was the most key influence on this title. Yukito is constantly faced with asking himself, is there meaning to this life? Is there purpose to living lives which are both cursed and blessed? Regardless of the answers, he seems content to keep trucking along anyways. The direct contrast to him then is Takuji Mamiya, a timid boy who seemed to experience intense bullying up until Sakura's suicide triggered an immense change in him, now turning into a charismatic, cruel, and violent cult leader attempting to preach a message of leaving this foul, unequal world in exchange for one which is perfect, freed of the horrors that torture us all. For those who have played SubaHibi, his character is the one which is the least directly changed and more so expanded on there. He's an unflinching and painful depiction of how bullying, trauma, and being deprived of agency can lead someone to go to extreme measures in order to find and create meaning in their life, and the views prior to his, which is the very last, do an incredible job building up intense mystery over who he is and why he changed so suddenly, leading to a final sequence that exemplifies what makes Tsui no Sora interesting. Both Yukito and Takuji find a mutual folly of sorts in Ayana Otonashi, a mysterious and cryptic girl who spends much of her time staring out to the sky on the rooftop and tosses dozens of questions and bizarre statements to anyone who tries to converse with her. While not hostile or ill-willed, she nevertheless befuddles Yukito and outright pisses off Takuji with how she questions both of their life philosophies and goals. She is, without any doubt in my mind, the absolute best character in the game. Her discussions with the other cast members, as cryptic as they might feel at first, leave a lot for the viewer to ponder on well after finishing the story, and the way the 2 epilogue endings tie it all together makes the story come together despite its serious problems, which, sad to say, I think are most clear in the rest of the cast, with by far the worst offender being Kotomi Wakatsuki. She's a cheery and chipper girl who loves her sports and always gets top grades, but hides beneath her bright exterior a sadness and anxiety over what's happening in the world, and now guilt over being unable to save Zakuro from her fate. On the surface, that has an immense amount of potential. Guilt over being unable to stop a death that was out of your hands is something I know all too well, and I do think there are moments here and there where it's able to capture a whirlwind of grief, self-blame, and frustration with the world, but those feel few and far between, with her ultimately not doing much of anything besides feeling bad for her inability to do anything while looking up to Yukito and wishing for him to save her. Zakuro Takashima's fate is somehow even worse than this. Born to a family who seemingly doesn't respect her, stuck with classmates who abuse and extort her, and without any friends who really care for her, Sakuro's life is an absolute living hell of no fault of her own, and I don't think the game really evolves beyond treating her as anything but the sad girl who kills herself. I know I said I wouldn't compare this game to SubaHibi too much in this video, but Sakuro's view in that is a perfect example of how you depict someone struggling with mental health and the horrific bullying that drives someone to end their life without making it all that exists, and her view here is a perfect example of how you don't. There is next to nothing positive in her life, no signs of joy that aren't ultimately tragic, and basically no characterization beyond her being miserable and eventually falling to delusions of grandeur. While that claustrophobic viewpoint does allow her character to effectively capture a certain kind of mental state, it also deprives her of feeling like she has any depth. And unfortunately, that's kind of reflective of TNS's general treatment of women besides Ayana. Some, like Ayumi, exist to be timid messes who get turned into explicitly dehumanized sex objects, while others fall into tired stereotypes, like Yasuko as a lesbian-coded classmate who's jealous and vengeful that she couldn't be with her crush. To be fair, I don't want to make this sound like this is an issue unique to this game, because a huge amount of vintage eroge I reviewed is exactly like this too. While there are plenty of good examples of well-developed women in the genre at this time, such as in Elf's Isaku, a fantastic game which directly inspired TNS, the vast majority I've played which weren't by Elf were awful in this exact way. I will commend Skaji for trying to make an effort with Kotomi and Sakuro, because neither of them feel like they're intentionally malicious depictions. The former feels like an attempt at showing how even outwardly positive go-getter femgirls struggle with the horrors of the world, and the latter an attempt to capture how miserable it feels to be a victim of extreme bullying, but neither of them have enough meat on their bones to pull this off in my book. Despite all of this, however, this is still a game written by Skaji, and his talents clearly come through in its best moments. Those who have played something by him probably know what I'm talking about. It's his unique ability to bring characters to life through evocative prose and dialogue, a sense for character voice like few others, and an expansive knowledge of numerous academic fields that allow for his narratives to feel diverse in themes and grounded in execution, even and especially as they become more surreal. This is exemplified in Yukito and Takuji's views. The former feels like a philosophizing version of your typical VN protagonist point of view. Casual observations about the world will turn into roaming monologues about the nature of humanity, while the latter is a psychological horror fever dream concocted out of an incoherent ideology based in fragments of real ideas, histories, and genuine criticism of the nature of society and education. The vibes created in both their views can be absolutely fantastic, a legit interesting mystery and philosophical dive, and some of the best psychological horror that VNs had to offer in the 1990s. And I'd also say that even for as much as I think Kotomi and Sakuro's views are kind of weak, their prose is still at the very least engaging and trance-inducing through sheer character alone. Kotomi's is stunted and scattered in a way that captures her anxiety and resolve alike, and Sakuro's is painfully hopeless and desperate in a manner reminiscent of times I got stuck in my own worst spirals. For the most part, the game uses some astoundingly simple and parsable Japanese to accomplish this, with only a handful of uncommon words and hyper-specific concepts pointed to when necessary, which means that if you're well-read and don't have to pause to look up words, this game kind of puts you in a weird lull, only occasionally broken up by the reminder that quadratic equations exist. The only last thing I can really broadly criticize of the writing is that the philosophical elements can feel poorly integrated at times. There are plenty of amazing 1000 IQ battles like you would expect from Skaji in here, sure, but there's also plenty of times where it feels like you're just getting a Wittgenstein extra dumped on you rather than actually woven into the story fabric. It works in the sense that it introduces it into the story and the story might build on it, but it doesn't feel particularly creative or insightful. And while we're on the topic of philosophy, I feel that it must be said again that TNS 99 is a deeply, deeply hopeless game that shows a lot of pretty gruesome things just to say, man, the world sure does suck, doesn't it? It's a story which is highly reflective of a certain take on nihilism that I think most people in this world have felt at this point. Society sucks, people suck, the world has no meaning, truth is a myth, and while we can still live out good days, not all of us are going to be afforded that, so it makes sense some people just get fed up. Suffice to say, I have feelings about this being terribly immature, but without getting into spoilers, all I can really say is that capturing this is both the greatest strength and weakness of the narrative. And while this isn't a gripe, I do kind of have to question the labeling of this game as Denpa. Or more accurately, it's that time of an Amelie Doree Denpa video from Mrs. Amelie Doree to talk about Denpa again because she, will never not be confused by it. The game only vaguely feels like the other two big Denpa titles, and many of the elements people associate with the genre, particularly the inability for the narration to discern reality from fiction, is barely present until the last segment. While some viewers might be saying that's enough to make it qualify as Denpa based on the common English definition of being broadly about delusions, social isolation, and disconnection from reality, that would also make a huge amount of psychological horror works from all around the world Denpa, and I am pretty sure nobody's arguing that Fear or The Ring is Denpa. Are you fucking kidding me right now? Despite this, however, I do consider Tsui no Sora Denpa because of its specific vibes, and there is really some explaining in order to make sense of that. I'm gonna repeat some history I've already gone over in prior videos because it's been a while and I know there's gonna be new people coming in precisely because of how famous this game is, but if you've been watching my videos for a while, you probably know what's coming. Hello, girlies and fuck it, you're in the Denpa cave, you're in my living room. Denpa did not come down from the skies in the 1980s like some sort of weird radio wave, but was arguably the convergence of a lot of different subversive art, culture, and history within Japan.
arguably the starting point was erogudo nonsense in the 1920s, which started as a commentary on contemporary Japanese society and the erotic grotesque nonsense present within it. This collided with an interest in conspiracy theories such as radio wave conspiracies in the 1980s, which turned into Denpa K, something which often had an ableist bent. Don't believe me? This is the magazine that Doku Denpa comes from, that term that's in so many Denpa works, it fucking sucks. This, along with the adjacent Kichikuke, which is more concerned with matters of the occult, bled into niche otaku subculture in general, leading to a weird convergence in the 1990s, perhaps best symbolized in Otsuki Kenji's novel from 1993, Shinkyo Shuko Moide Kyo, which deals with a girl who falls into a mysterious cult that claims to have communication of a god and has magic 5G radio wave powers which drive people mad, and there's also a guy who gets intertwined in the whole ordeal and hates his life. Kenji was not concerned with writing burgeoning Denpa-K genre fiction, however, but instead wanted to commentate on how ultimately nobody is special or destined to save the world and we're all trying to hide it behind different things, which I guess is also something Sora is about. This disconnection from the label of Denpa, however, is something that I think is key along with the history to understanding why Denpa works are so disconnected, because it's something that all three of the authors of the big Denpa games share.
Sayo Oshii draws heavily from erogudo nonsense to tell a bizarro story. Jisatsu 101 was concerned with how youths are exposed to potentially toxic subcultures like Denpa-K and Kichikuke directly, and Sora uses a mishmash of these ideas and aesthetics to explore Western philosophical ideas through a work of otaku subculture, albeit one Skaji himself has said was immature. This complicated shared history and series of influences is how these three feel tangentially tied together and distinct from psychological horror on the whole, and why it's so impossible to pin down exactly what they share in common that isn't just common to psychological horror stories anyways. This history is what separates Fear from Shizuku in my opinion, based on the historical analysis that I and close friends have done, as well as reading way too much of this stuff. Now, does this mean you can't make a Denpa anymore? Are we just out Denpa with the Denpa 1? I don't know. I consider SubaHibi Denpa because it's clearly drawing on all this too, with adaptations in the modern day, particularly in its use of the internet, but I sure as hell wouldn't consider cross-channel or Kusarihime Denpa because neither seem concerned with the specific emphasis on psychological horror derived from examination of contemporary controversial subcultures, particularly those youths are attached to. This is all a massive tangent to say Sora, Jisatsu 101, and Sayo Oshii are all Denpa, but probably not in the way you think because Denpa as a genre is a horribly ill-defined thing, and psychological horror derived from contemporary controversial subcultures is the most concrete definition I've ever come up with or seen anywhere, and I still don't feel completely comfortable with that definition, particularly because that might mean Slender Man is Denpa, and just saying that put the fear of God into me. At least the H scenes here don't do that, though they aren't great. This game is loaded with them, and aside from a single scene in Yukito's view that's passable, I found most of it uninteresting to read. All of the gusto from the narrative disappears in favor of curt and uninteresting descriptions of body parts slapping together, interrupted by tepid dialogue that's as mediocre as most eroge erotica from that era tends to be. Nothing ever feels like it's adding anything meaningful to the story not portrayed elsewhere. Unfortunately, the score to Sora is also a mess. Composed by Time Bandit, a mysterious fellow whose only credit is this game, TNS's score is odd. There are some positives here, like the fact that it has some genuinely great variety. There's 15 tracks spread evenly across the game's 6 or so hour-long duration, with memorable melodies and simple but endearing instrumentation, wistful airy guitars, calming electric pianos, distorted and powerful percussion, and so on. While that's great on paper, the problem is no track lasts for more than half a minute for reasons I cannot fathom. It isn't an engine limitation because Macromedia Director has supported streaming of normal CD audio since its early days, and it can't be a space limitation either because the game is barely 200 megabytes in size on a disc. They were a whole 500 megabytes free for audio. That's like 5 Croc Legend of Gobbo's worth of music. One could say it was a time constraint put on by whoever was handling the manufacturing distribution of the game, assuming it wasn't KeroQ themselves, but that seems pretty odd given that the production of all the other game assets would have left plenty of time for soundtrack composition. Maybe it was a budget issue if Time Bandit was a musician contracted by KeroQ, but since this is a pretty tiny production, I would assume that it was a friend working as hard as everyone else with little upfront pay. As someone who has written many game soundtracks, this score confounds me, but I will at least give credit where it's due. Against all odds, the score is still somehow not exhausting to listen to. The loops are just about the right length and switched out often enough to avoid feeling horrendously repetitive, and most have enough going on in them to be vaguely interesting. It isn't the worst soundtrack ever made, just undercooked. Raw.
It's raw.
Besides that, there really isn't much to remark on with Sora's audio. The game has no voice acting as should be expected from a low-budget title in the youth of the Windows VN era, and sound effects are few and far between, but generally good when they're used. The compression applied to the audio also I think actually benefits the aesthetic, as the lo-fi feel is right in line with the crunchy artwork. Speaking of the youthful era of Windows visual novels, Sora came out in that odd fledgling period where any codified design ideas that existed on the PC-98 with its funny widescreen aspect ratio were swiftly upended when Windows 95 forced everyone into using high-color 640 40 by 480 and 800 by 600 squares. TNS then is a title that utterly embodies this, blending the simple elegance of UX seen in works like Canon with the extravagant formalities of the mid to late PC98 era. Sprites are layered on top of backgrounds contained within a distinct border, and text is layered on top of it all put up against a pixelated picture of a sky and a mysterious stylized eye hidden under it that opens slowly as reality becomes more unstable, only visible during scene transitions. It's simultaneously incoherent and bizarrely put together, yet completely comprehensible and only further adds to the vibes of the narrative. In a similar but seemingly less intentional fashion, the backgrounds of the game are mixed in their construction. While some feel like PC98 pixel art with the dithering removed, others are these weird eclectic bashing togethers of digitized drawings, clip arts, and careful pixel art, at times creating a coherent, unnerving atmosphere, and at others looking amateurish and almost comedic. The character designs are also just a little bit off. Some like Gotami and Takuji feel like fun pastiches and takes on more grounded anime character archetypes, and some like Iriru and Usami are delightfully over top in a way that I am super endeared to. But then you get some like Ozawa and Asumi who just don't look right, and even for characters who do look right, some of their standing sprites or Tachie go for an exaggerated manga expression that just does not fit. None of this is me saying that I'm all for more same-face artwork like a Type Moon fanatic, because I actually wish more games would try to have very distinct-looking characters. Sakura no Uta is a good example of how this can be done. Characters like Friedman and Seijiro look extremely different from much of the rest of the cast, but they're still working within the boundaries of the general aesthetics. It's coherent, but distinct, whereas here it doesn't even feel like the same game. Despite these complaints, however, I cannot deny this game has vibes for fucking days, and the weird jank only adds to that in places. The art, soundtrack, and writing all come together despite their individual issues to craft an atmosphere that is notably distinct from both SubaHibi and TNS 2020, with a few segments that artistically really hold up to this day, particularly in Takuji's view with its incredible usage of image manipulation that was just barely consumer affordable. It's just a shame then that all of this is blocked by the engine that this game runs on.
Depending on who you are, the name Macromedia Director either means nothing to you or has left you simultaneously starry-eyed and quaking for fear over what's to come next. For the unfamiliar, Director was the de facto choice in the 1990s for artists who wanted to create something on the computer, but for any reason did not want to code, be it difficulty learning, a lack of time, impediment to workflow, lack of coding staff, etc., etc. There were many other options, of course, but when I say artists, I am talking about people who traditionally dabble in other art forms and wanted something that was more comprehensive than, say, ZZT. Also, I'm exaggerating a little bit. To say it is one of the most important and monumental pieces of software toolkit ever made is an understatement. It is a pivotal piece of the CD revolution in the 1990s, and it was game-changing. It opened the floodgates for people who would otherwise be unable to experiment with computers as art platforms to do exactly that, and paved the way for Shockwave and Flash. It also should be said that two of the key developers were a trans woman and a black man, which fucking rocks. I cannot state enough how important Macromedia Director is and how much I cherish it, but it is important to note that, like with all WYSIWYG or what you see is what you get development environments, the emphasis on abstraction and the background wizardry needed to accomplish that has always needed Jink to work with in the end. To say nothing of the dev side, which seemed to range from fine to Renpai level nightmares, the engine has always had weird problems for me as a runtime, even on the most bland 1990s Macs and Windows rigs I've owned.
The fact that Tsui no Sora even runs is a testament to how flexible and powerful Director is, because it does not run well. Practically everything you would expect from visual novels is either not present or so horrifically mangled so as to be rendered functionally non-existent, presumably because Director was never meant to handle something like this, and the code that KeroQ had to do to make it all work is spaghetti to hell and back. Backlog? Nope. CG gallery? Not here. Auto mode? Nah. Keyboard support? You have a mouse. Game saving? You get 10 slots and it stops working when choices appear. Scene select? Only as a dev mode torture nexus. UI options? It's fine, you didn't need to change those anyways. Full screen? No, you get a window with mandatory borders. Alt tabbing? Only if you want the music to stop playing until another track is queued. Text skip? Oh, it actually has this one. It's a speed setting in the options. And this is all assuming you can get this game to run, because I heard it just straight up does not work for some people. A problem further exacerbated by Windows 11 systematically murdering the functionality of virtual machines through forcing everyone to use a hypervisor for security reasons. After 2 hours of pure struggle trying to get this game to run at a size larger than a fucking postage stamp by any means necessary without awful blurring, I gave up and accepted that I have to use Windows 11's god-awful DPI scaling to force the game into a larger window size. Didn't look great, it gave me neck pain, but it worked and I got to see Ayana's girl cock. However, this is where I should talk about the ongoing fan translation project in some depth, as one of the main selling points of it besides the English script is that it ports the entire game, in both languages, to Renpai. The lead translator of the group, Kakeda Sky, sent me a work-in-progress build to talk about this for the video, and it is a monumental improvement over the original, adding every single quality of life feature that you would expect and then some. This is to say nothing of the English translation as well, which is shaping up to be incredible. Even in this pre-release build without major editing passes, it still captures the spirit weird and intent of the original text brilliantly, making this a great way to experience the game. Ian Sky is doing great work here, and I cannot recommend playing this version of the game enough once it's out to the public, and I would suggest following the socials for their group and a project as well, as the original game they're working on is also looking pretty cool. And speaking of cool things and some not so cool things, I think it's about time we get to the spoilers segment so I can go in depth about what I find interesting in this story, which also necessitates, to an extent, spoiling some of SubaHibi and TNS 2020, even if non-specifically. So if you want to go in knowing as little as possible, then skip ahead to the closing segment where I give my final thoughts and talk about some other interesting things. But not before this Patreon break, where I thank the donors who make this possible and shout out cool folks that you should check out. Hello everybody and welcome once again to the Patreon segment. In record time at that, I haven't gotten here this fast since January of last year. And like always, it's that time of the video to give life and channel updates, thank those who donate to make this possible, answer questions from patrons, and shout out cool folks that you should watch. I'm gonna keep things shorter than usual this time because this video is shorter than usual, which isn't a huge deal anyways because I really only got one life and channel update to give y'all. I am, for almost certain, gonna be at Anime North 2025 in Toronto from May 23rd to May 25th. I'll just be attending as a guest and hanging out with friends, but if you happen to see me wandering to vendor halls or anything, feel free to say hi and ask for a hug. And that aside, I again have to thank everyone who makes these videos possible through their donations. Having any sort of steady income as a trans person in the world right now is something I do not take for granted in any way, shape, or form, and I'm glad that I have the opportunity to make these videos that seem to mean a lot to y'all in these troubling times. So, thank you everybody. And to give back a little to the community that makes this possible, I'd like to, once again, shout out something cool that you should check out. Just like last time, to keep things short, there'll only be one thing this time. If you'd like a chance to be shouted out or you got something you want me to shout out, then feel free to drop me a line by Blue Sky, Tumblr DMs, Patreon, or email. Just make clear you're asking for a shout out if you do it by email in the headline, because I'm getting inundated with generic influencer marketing emails and I cannot tell who's a fan or mass mailer. So the one person I'd like to shout out this time is a bit of an odd pick, but something I think everybody needs in these trying times. Sandwiches of History. Run by a fellow named Barry Enderwick, it is exactly what it says on the tin. Various sandwiches from history all around the world. Some are modern, some are vintage, but all are presented in short form videos of an endearing style and flair that just, I don't know man, they make me happy to watch and make me want to cook for people. It's so relaxing and just inspiring, and I don't know, I'm endeared to it. I think y'all will enjoy it too, and hopefully you can discover some new sandwiches to make. I know that I will be doing so. And with that hopefully sandwiched in between other tabs to check out later, I'm sorry, that was awful. Anyways, I want to talk about Patreon questions. Let's go. Klob asks, do you ever see yourself covering a reverse harem title or even one with a male-male-female dynamic? If there's something that catches my eye with that, sure, I'm really open to cover whatever. Mallard Duck says, asks, which engine do you think is best for creating indie VNs and why? So literally all of them are jank in different ways, but I guess Ren'Py would be the best given the mass amount of information out there on wrangling into doing whatever you need. Like seriously, you can look up basically any inquiry and you'll find an answer, and if you can't, it's based on Python. You can just look up Python shit. Sulfur Goat asks, I wanted to hear if you know anything of Limbus Company or Project Moon universe. I am aware of it, but I haven't really spent much time with anything Project Moon. I do eventually want to play Lobo Corp and Ruina though. Shriek asks, do you have any recommendations for Baby's First Edoguro? I think Gun Katana is one of the least downright brutal of the Black Site catalog, particularly because the B-movie vibes help to keep things feel less grody. So if you're new to Edoguro, I would suggest that game. Just if you're allergic to the FPS gameplay, download a 100% save so you can skip all the FPS gameplay and then you can just play the story. That's a pro tip, pro gamer tip. Alright, with all that said and done, I think it's time to close out this segment. Again, I want to thank everyone who makes these videos possible by donating, as I could not do them without y'all. This being my full-time job means I can focus on getting a video out every month, rather than having to squeeze production in with another job. Again, like I said, any sort of stable work like this in this economy is a blessing, so seriously, thank you. And if you would like to help make these videos possible, see them early sometimes without the funny advertiser bars, get monthly updates, suggest games to cover, have your name on the side of the screen, and other neato things, then consider pledging as little as $1 per month on Patreon. Every bit helps and all amounts get the same benefits, so pay what you want, if you want, and enjoy everything that's available and everything that's to come. And if you just want to leave me a tip so I can buy a coffee or myself lunch or something, then feel free to donate on Coffee. Recurring donations there also get benefits, I just forget to update it sometimes, so it doesn't get as much updates as Patreon. But if you'd prefer to watch without donating, that is, as always, totally fine. Watching, commenting, liking, subscribing, and especially sharing these videos around is a massive part of what makes them possible, and I am incredibly grateful for every bit of support. Again, thank you everyone so much, and let's get back to the show. In its 4 viewpoints, there is one particularly pressing question I think Tsui no Sora brings up. How can you explain the hypocrisies of the world? For the attempts of Yukito and Takuji's views to explore this, and Kotomi and Zakuro's greater emphasis on exploring the suffering and hypocrisies as they unfold, TNS is able to present not so much as an argument, but rather open-ended food for thought. To get into this, I'm going to be recounting the plot in a way that makes a bit more sense for a video. Rather than go through all 4 views individually, I'll be exploring the overarching story as it progresses, since there's far more overlapping elements in them than unique ones. A bulk of what's unique in each viewpoint is in the prose, and it's for that reason I really encourage you to see this segment not as summary or all there is to Tsui no Sora, but just me discussing what I need to in order to go into what I want to for this video. And for better or worse, this means we're beginning with what's presented in the most unique view, Zakuro's. 4 days before the rest of the story begins, she finds herself repeating the same tired and painful day that she's always been stuck in. Waking up without a sense of purpose, going to a school that torments her, being sexually assaulted by a blackmailing bully named Yuichi, and musing to herself during class about the meaninglessness of life. The same thing, day in, day out. Everyone just pretends to be happy about their lives when no one can truly be happy about our endless repetitions of nothingness and pain. Even the rare bright spots, such as talking with the always sweet and gentle Kotomi, can't make up for it. But upon arriving home from her school, she finds something on her desk. A mysterious letter, supposedly sent by friends from her past life, which promises that one of her problems will soon be solved, and that she has a world-saving fate far greater than her current painful and empty life. While it seems too good to be true at first, the letter turns out to have some veracity when Yuichi drops dead from the rooftops by an unknown cause the next day. Empowered by seeing the brains of an abuser splattered all over the pavement, Zakuro has her spirits suddenly redampened when the resident mystery girl of the school, Ayana Otonashi, appears out of nowhere and tells her that his death was nothing more than an incident unrelated to whatever she's thinking, and any thought she has that she might be destined to save the world is misguided. She is, after all, just a normal person, and that does not preclude her from living a good life. But having suffered so much, Zakuro can't accept that her meaningless, tortured life truly is normal or that it has any hope, and can't see herself wanting to live it without a clear purpose. Maybe with that, even if it's a lie, she could stand being a part of this world. To wit, Ayana asks her if she would be willing to die for that purpose, though she swears she would never do such a thing that soon turns out to be untrue. That night, she excitedly checks the letter again, believing her life is about to turn a new leaf, and meets with the 2 other chosen warriors the next day, Usami and Ayumi. According to them, they and Zakuro were angels who fought to save the once peaceful but now corrupted planet Elohim from its evils and a world-ending calamity known as Harumegido, but they fell in battle and their powers were sealed away following reincarnation. To prevent them from ever returning, the forces of evil sent forth soldiers such as Yuichi to suppress and torture them, ensuring they would never find their true powers again. For the sake of people who are good in this world like Kotomi, Zakuro and the others must work to regain their powers and save the world from the evils dwelling within it. And to do so, they must perform a ritual known as the Spiral Matai. Through it, they'll regain their true forms and be ready to fight Harumegido once again on July 20th. Through this promise for reason in her life, Zakuro finally finds joy, seeing newfound purpose and narrative in everything that's happened to her. She goes around the school and talks to everyone she knows one last time before her big moment, thanking Kotomi for being kind to her, calmly telling Mamiya of her beliefs on the soon-to-come apocalypse, and yelling at Ayana for trying to stop her from fulfilling her purpose. When she does finally meet with her supposed allies, however, both of them are found quaking in fear over what's to come, because the Spiral Matai involves being instanced from death, saved by the reawakening of their powers. If it fails, all 3 of them will die, a prospect that horrifies Usami and Ayumi, but doesn't even faze Zakuro, who insists that they must move forward. They must proceed bravely and fulfill their purpose. They must create meaning in their life, which of course was never going to happen. While I don't believe Zakuro's view is the worst in the game, as it does still have more to it than Kotomi's, it's still questionably executed and emblematic of this game's greatest issue, the lack of meat. People complain all the time about visual novels being too long or stories having too much filler, and while I'm inclined to agree in some cases, while I think y'all are just fucking cowards most of the time, I think those same people also forget just how important it is to show your cast existing outside of what develops the main story. We don't see Zakuro feeling joy from anything that isn't awful besides a brief conversation with Kotomi. All of her adult scenes are non-consensual and heavily emphasize her suffering and disgust in a way that does not flesh out her character, and we have no sense of what could have brought her happiness in her life, a genuine good path besides not getting bullied as much. It is a very clever claustrophobic story, and while that has some power, it ultimately harms itself with it. Zakuro here as a character is more or less solely defined by suffering, which directly advances the narrative, and it is really hard to emphasize with a character who's nothing more than that. It becomes mind-numbing because you're not given anything to care about or be emotional about besides innate sympathy for life being hard, in turn devaluing these very real emotions and experiences, which is kind of ironic given that a minor point here which becomes massively important in later Tsukkashi works, especially in Saku Uta, is the necessity for joy and pain to coexist so that they may give each other meaning in life. I don't want to make it sound like it's all awful though, because credits due where credits due. I actually think Zakuro's musings on her life are, in isolation, well written and painfully relatable. I struggled a lot with feeling listless and isolated in my teens, as being homeschooled led to me having no real social life of my own. I had little education, no job opportunities, and scant hope that I would ever amount to something. And is what society sells, as Yukito monologues at one point, not the idea that we shall all amount to something great? Is that not the lie we are told to live by, the copium we huff? If you never will, then what's all this suffering for? While I have never believed in something as grand as the idea that I'm a magical girl meant to save the world, even though I totally am, I have still relied on narrativizing my life in order to deal with the world at the worst times. I often imagined that everything I went through would amount to something, that perhaps as I was so often told in my life, God had a plan for me and my agony was nothing more than a stepping stone to fulfilling some sort of grand purpose. I never knew what that purpose was, but I believe there had to be something and tied together incidental events in my life to explain it. That is something common among people, and it is something that helps us cope with life when life gets rough. And Zakuro's monologuing forces us to face the fact that people who believe in delusions of great purpose often do so from that same place in which we are trying to make sense of our lives, because nobody wants to face the horrific truth that Ayana conveys to Zakuro, that nobody is special and thinking otherwise is a lie. We are all simple human beings who may find wonder one day and walk alongside suffering the next, and there may truly be no meaning in any of it. But again, where I think Tsui no Sora falls apart in this discussion of this is the inability to convey any other side. We aren't given any ways to try and manage this horror as it exists, nor are we allowed to imagine any sort of happier future or alternative. Pointing out the problems in the world and with the human mind without anything else besides just cope isn't deep, insightful commentary, it's being a doomer. We do have the power to change our worlds, and presenting nothing just reinforces the fake idea that we're helpless. Because of this, Zakuro feels less like a person and more like a blatant object that the story can add another perspective on how people deal with the injustices of the world, which can feel not only hollow, but even offensive at points given how sexual assault is utilized here. It doesn't feel like it's written with respect to the victim, but rather just showing it to the viewer to say, isn't this bad? Isn't her life painful? With no greater meaning or purpose. I commend that Tsukkashi attempted this because I think it speaks to how he's always wanted to create characters that deal with challenging topics and show them to people who may not know. It's commendable to want to talk about these pressing issues, but that also comes with a responsibility to do so with respect to those suffering from them, and all I can say is that personally I don't feel like that was here. But thankfully, the main portion of the story is a marked improvement from this. The following day, before an official announcement is even made, rumors spread amongst the student body over who died, how, for what reason, and what the gritty details are, all confirmed when the teacher Ayumi walks into the room and delivers the news to an anxious crowd. Rather than be shocked and disheartened, however, only a scant few people seem truly distraught by it. Yukito and Kotomi, who part after class to deal with it in their own ways, and Takuji, who is mortified by it. As Yukito reads philosophy on the rooftops and Kotomi practices sports, Takuji flees to his underground base in the old pool water tank to plead for advice from a drawing of his favorite magical girl, Riruru, but when she doesn't respond to his cries for hopes and fears over the end of the world, he once again runs around the school in a scramble until bumping into who else but Ayana Otonashi. In her usual cryptic ways, she asks if Takuji isn't afraid of dying, which of course he is. Humans innately fear pain. Death is, of course, painful and an undesired end to everything, but the alternative of living forever would be pure misery any way you cut it, too. Even if you were happy, you would simply live long enough to see those you love die, humanity perish, and you'd become a part of the cosmos, drifting as your mind slowly breaks. Even if you could stay in a happy reality forever, you would grow exhausted of your wonderful everyday, too, looping for thousands, millions, billions of years. Humans truly are unpleasable, desiring love yet fearing pain, refusing the end yet refusing eternity. Thoroughly broken and fearing both death and his purposeless life, Mamiya attempts to go home but stops short due to being haunted by grotesque spirits and malformed demons following him everywhere outside, ultimately rushing back to his secret base in Riruru. Unlike usual, however, she doesn't appear to him as just a mere drawing, but an actual person who comes to visit with a purpose. Through her magical powers, she's able to reveal to him hundreds of thousands of years of memories buried within his genes, instilling with him a fraction of the power of God. Suddenly, his timid and scared nature vanishes, and in its place, somebody somebody confident and capable, no longer fearing the end of the world, but rather welcoming the beginning of a new one, which is soon to come. At the end sky on the 20th of July, there is neither life nor death, existence nor unexistence. The following day, he immediately begins work on intimidating those who bullied him and spreading his gospel, most notably to Yukito, whom he greatly admires and believes will understand his teachings. Of course, neither him or Kotomi buy it, but Takuji is persistent in attempting to convince them and all the others of his beliefs, his fervor further reinforced by a horrific vision of the end sky bestowed by Ayana in an impromptu meeting. Confident in what's to come and egged on by whatever or whoever Riruru is, Takuji shows up for history class just to interrupt the teacher and call his teachings nothing more than stories. The whole world could be something the devil has just made up moments ago, with false memories implanted in our minds. And it is with this absurd declaration, and the teacher's refusal to accept the impending end of our world, that Mamiya knocks him out using a vase and makes his proclamation. The world shall end on July 20th, and the death of Zakuro and Yuichi were sacrifices ordained by God, so Takuji could be rebirthed into the savior to lead those who listen into a glorious, new, equal world, with those who choose not to join him left behind to burn in the hellfires of a wretched world filled with lies. It preaches about equality yet is unequal. It preaches free will yet we are not free. It preaches love yet love betrays us. It disdains murder yet murder is all around us. It tells us to be truthful yet lies to us. Our world is made of nothing but hypocrisies, and it is all doomed to end in the cataclysmic event known as the End Sky. And with that, Takuji flees, having delivered his gospel. This is, without a doubt, the most famous moment from this entire game, and one which remained largely unchanged in both SubaHibi and TNS 2020 for good reason. It is a perfect encapsulation of everything that works here. On a structural level, it wonderfully utilizes the multi-viewpoint narrative structure by first showing it to you from Yukito's perspective out of nowhere, and second from Takuji's perspective. Like Zakuro in her own delusions of grandeur, Takuji's did not develop out of nothing. We see him getting bullied and extorted for being timid and weak, and he's presumably led an otherwise miserable life full of inexplicable horrors. Subsequently, his beliefs are recontextualized from a bizarre, selfish, megalomaniacal cult ideology as it appears in Yukito's perspective, and into his genuine attempt to explain the world and give hope to those who are hopeless. And the thing is, like, Takuji isn't wrong that the world sucks, right? All four characters muse in their own ways about how utterly hopeless and depressing society is, with Kotomi's view, despite my general dislike for it, actually having some of the best moments of this. We live in a world where people are so disconnected from each other and their own humanity that struggles always feel like something you are uniquely alone in. Everyone drifts through work and school putting on a facade of happiness, when in reality, nobody is happy to do the same thing every day, desperately hoping that they might mean something while stuck in a system that denies that to all but a few. We live in a world that is unequal, constraining, manipulative, filled with lies, and propped up by literal systemization of murder. We are all desperate to be something and to have our lives feel meaningful, but when all avenues for this are denied as we're told to just keep believing the lies, what are we as people meant to conclude? That we aren't trying hard enough? That we're simply too ill? That we're wrong for questioning things and desiring to understand rather than accept? David Smale argues in his book Illusion and Reality that the actions of those struggling with mental health, such as those of Zakuro or Takuji, are not illogical or baseless responses to the world around them, but rather rational decisions based on the knowledge and experiences of the person suffering from those problems. Even if we refuse to acknowledge it and sell the myth of normalcy, the reality is the world is not normal, and some of us just live in realities that allow us to better lie than others.
Though the truth is not just a matter of personal perspective, neither is it fixed and certain, objectively out there and independent of human knowing. The truth changes according to, among other things, developments and alterations in our values and understandings. It is an act of unbelievable hubris to suppose that we have, or could have, a kind of contact with absolute objective reality which guarantees us a truth which is independent of our interests. Truth changes in a direction, and it is not just the case that one view is as good as another.
Takuji is right to perceive that the world is broken, and the people following him are right in yearning for purpose in their lives. They are responding to a completely understandable desire to stop pretending that the pipeline of subpar education to worker drones works for most people, and find new meaning. But also, it's like really obvious that his ideology is wrong and terrible in almost every single way. He is still a cult leader struggling with mental health, exploiting other people with mental health issues. He's just found a broken way to explain things that coheres everything together based on his life experiences and struggles.
It's a similar mechanism to why people believe in conspiracy theories or genuine actual cults, because they offer meaning and explanations where general society isn't in the literal business of authoring them, or at least not offering real ones, while not being as forwardly complex or requesting self-criticality as something like actual leftist beliefs. They offer the ability to shrug off everything as a grand failure induced by some sort of explicable apocalyptic force or some innate flaw outside the grasp of average humans, rather than something deeply human and above all else, actually addressable by the layman. To begin to try and understand the hypocrisies of the world and why they exist means means at minimum two things. One, upending the worldview that the average person has been fed throughout their life, and often intellectually undermining the foundations of givens like capitalism or gender. And two, it is to accept something which Yukito regularly muses on during his view, that life, from the moment of birth, is an inherently contradictory thing, often with no explanation no matter how desperately we want one, and neither of these are something that people are prepared to do overnight.
Things ramp up intensely from here, as Takuji's mental state rapidly declines and people truly begin to buy into his doctrine, ultimately amassing a cult which believes his every word. According to him, they have no choice but to accept the meaninglessness of life and the coming end, and to search their hearts for what it is they truly feel and know. It is only with that they can be led to the end sky and discard their bodily husks to embrace a new world, one which it does have meaning, one which is equal, born of the collected hearts and realities inside us all, rather than the false and hypocritical reality we live in. Subsequently, they abandon any pretense of morality and indulge in their darkest desires, with one, Yasuko, even going as far as to kidnap Kotomi out of a jealous rage toward Yukito. The only threat he can't seem to squash in all this is Ayana, who Riruru claims to be nothing more than her dregs, but is clearly something beyond comprehension. In her own words, she is a being which holds self-identity. Ayana is Ayana. Takuji, however, has nothing, not even in alignment with the human ideas of space and time anymore. And yet, even as he believes he has transcended all that is human to obtain the role of a savior, of a messiah, he cannot let go of his affection for someone he admires greatly, Yukito. Glancing out at the end sky approaching as they talk, he decides it's time to make the final preparations for the event and leads all of his followers to the school rooftops. One by one, they depart from this twisted and lie-filled world, but not before Yukito arrives, having saved Kotomi moments before and deciding to return to the school to end this once and for all. Even though he's too late to save his other classmates, he still has a chance to stop Takuji before he foolishly takes his own life and challenges his philosophy of saving people by leading them to their death. But Takuji, rather than offer anything meaningful, simply laughs at Yukito for his naivety. Because all of us, no matter we choose to live or die, are losers by default. None of us win because we have all been cursed simply by being born. Life itself is a curse. But to Yukito, being cursed, being on the losing side, doesn't mean we have already lost. We can still take responsibility for our own existence simply by looking out at the world, at the life and the death, that which is both blessed and cursed, two opposites we are constantly living with. Simply by observing, we can find things which are right in this world. Even if they're horrifying, we can still observe it and accept it all. While Mamiya doubts this optimism, he does concede that perhaps one thing is truly right in this world. Even in this erroneous existence, he still loves Yukito. Not in a gay way, literally, he says that, but in the sense of them being two birds of a feather. One, Mamiya, is an eagle who merely glances out at the world and never enjoys its spoils. And the other, Yukito, is an eagle who ventures out to hunt. It is with this that Mamiya says his goodbyes and looks at the world as his body falls from the roof. The end of his meaningless life, but not the end of the world. Months later, Yukito wakes up in a void leading to two potential realities, the first of which sees him meeting with Ayana and being in what is more or less hell or perhaps purgatory. It's an empty, peaceful world of nothingness, only broken up by moments of pleasure with Ayana, who confesses her love to Yukito. The other is seemingly that eternity of wonderful everydays which Ayana told to Takuji, a never-ending, happy life with a being that is both Kotomi and Ayana, and talks again about the two opposing eagles. The world seemingly has not come to an end, but who's to say that with any certainty? Compared to the realistic optimism which SubaHibi ends on, or the more positive nihilism which TNS 2020 goes into, the original Tsui no Sora is overall a much darker game thematically. Neither of the epilogues nor the ending of Takuji's view definitively answer the question posed throughout about the hypocrisies of the world or the meaning of life, and the closest we get to any sort of statement are Yukito's musings that goodness exists around us and living life for itself is something good. But none of that does away with what is presented. There is, in the end, no explanation, no justification, and no reason for everything that happens in the world beyond some observable facts. Life does not carry innate meaning. It simply is, and some of us are gonna live shit-ass lives while some of us will live maybe, kinda, possibly, probably not better ones. It is very much a step removed from the downright hopeless readings of Nietzsche's text that people are familiar with, held up by only a faint bit of love for the world. While I don't agree with this, I do want to talk for a moment about why I think there is value in art that conveys this. Not because it's correct per se, but simply because it exists and people do at times need to have these feelings told back to them so they don't feel alone. As I said in that segment on Zakura Bakudo's ending, and as I discussed in depth in my video on Lyresoft's 2002 horror masterpiece Kusarihime, I have been in this headspace numerous times and felt utterly defeated with finding happiness in my life. No amount of self-aggrandizing or praise could eliminate the feeling that something was wrong about the world, and the feelings of powerlessness pushed onto me by a society that required oppression to function led me at many points to believe that none of this really did matter. What point is there in being alive if I'm just going to continue to suffer? To lie to myself that my life will amount to something is what I thought. Such hopelessness is what characterizes many people's understanding of nihilism, and even if it isn't accurate to what nihilism truly is as Nietzsche characterizes it, I really don't think anybody can say that it is an incorrect or illogical feeling based solely on how the modern circumstances we live under make people feel. We're just simply told to be adults and move on, accept how things are, and pretend that what we feel is not real or really important, to drown the hopelessness in myths of becoming something great until we break and vanish without a trace. We are told to simply be a bird that stares on at a horizon, having never done a thing. As I have said many times in this video, people like Takuji and Zakuro are right to look at all this and feel distraught, and they are not wrong in a purely reactive sense to respond how they have. The world tells them that they're supposed to have a great purpose, so does an absurd belief system which gives them meaning and logic behind everything, in a world which is supposed to have logic and purpose, not seem rational?
Accepting responsibility for our conduct merely means that we acknowledge that we have reasons for it, and that those reasons are ours. Even our most incomprehensible actions, it may turn out, are the result neither of our badness, nor madness, nor even helplessness, but rather arise from a perfectly reasonable and understandable construction, our construction, of our experience, even though that construction is lived out in our activity rather than transmitted through the medium of words.
We are all stuck working with the facts we know about life, and given that we live in a world which is literally attempting to suppress factual information and alternative perspectives, some of us don't get the opportunity to learn. As individuals who are often tortured out of finding community, our perspectives may be the only one normal society ever wants to give us, because the world of a collective consciousness that Takuji believes in does not exist. So, what then? Are all of us who have been isolated from the world doomed to start cults and believe in delusions of grandeur? And are all of us who blend with the masses doomed to lie to ourselves in order to craft meaning? Where our lives only carry meaning once they've been turned into something of a beginning and end, and must we accept we just all yearn for that meaning while living out a lie? Do we have no choice but to see our birth as a curse? I don't believe so, and I don't believe Tsui no Sora entirely buys into this either. It is a deeply bleak and hopeless game, that much is for sure, and it's hardly optimistic or encouraging about life. But I believe there is a counter to this in Yukito's view, which crystallizes his belief on life itself being a blessing. In one scene, he recounts to Ayana a dream about a newborn. It cries in pain over having been brought into this world, and yet those around it see it as a blessing. In its agonized wails, Yukito feels a desire to end its life, its suffering, to bestow upon it meaning from an end. And yet, he couldn't bring himself to do so. Instead, he simply stood there in a dream, watching something which was both a blessing and a curse take place, the beginning of life that would lead to death. He had no real reason to do this. There was nothing mandating he look at this stinky, smelly, poopy baby, but he did it anyways. And as he heard the child begin to cry like a child should, he too began to cry, happy for a reason he couldn't understand. Perhaps because he was like that at one point too. Whatever the reason may be, he was simply happy, and that's enough. I believe when Yukito talks about taking responsibility for our lives simply by looking out and seeing that there are things which are right in this world, this is what he's referring to. Even in the midst of all the horrible things that exist and all the hypocrisies that fill our world, there are still things which are simply correct. A child crying its first tears, an earnest smile, clouds drifting, and so forth. The world is full of beautiful things, and to deny that innocent, harmless, graceful beauty, to look away from it all and say it is wrong and the whole world is wrong, is not a path forward. Because simply by observing the world around us and never denying what exists, no matter how grotesque it may be, we can find truth. And in much of that truth, especially what comes from ourselves, there is happiness. In my reading of a story, this is why Takuji and Yukito are the ego that they are, even if they may seem the opposite at first. Because while Takuji looked out at the world and denied it, glancing on aimlessly and destroying, Yukito sought the world out and accepted all in it, even if it didn't make him happy. This, of anything in the game, is what sticks in my mind the most because I see myself as having been both a dispassionate observer and a passionate finder at different points. I grew up kept away from the world out of fears that I would be hurt, that the outside world had nothing but horrors I needed to be shielded from, so I would only see the blessings in life. The irony being that being forced to merely observe was hurting me in ways I couldn't understand until I ventured out. It has been 4 years since I stopped observing the world as I knew it and began hunting to know more. I've been hurt in more ways that I can count and felt like my life was truly cursed, questioning why I had to be hurt so bad as a youth, why the world continued to be cruel to me as an adult, and what purpose there was in me going on with this all. I've come damn close to ending it all multiple times. But I felt that when I merely sat in place, too, when I only looked at what was given to me, rather than when I looked out for myself. By choosing to venture out, I found the opportunity to form and join with communities and to see the world from more perspectives than just my own. I began to realize through other people who questioned the world that there was more to it than I had been told, that I didn't need to lie about being something great to have purpose. Even through all of this pain and suffering, I've seen glimpses of what is beautiful and right, and I've understood the blessings in my own life through it. I've been able to grasp onto those little moments of happiness and find meaning for myself in pushing for them. I've realized that merely being human with other humans is purpose enough, and I feel that is something that deserves to be fought for. I do think Ayana is right that our lives don't have innate meaning and that none of us are destined to be anything more than mere people, still capable of living out happy days even if we don't find meaning. I also believe Takuji is right in that the world we live in is disgustingly hypocritical, preaching to us about what we are and are not meant to be while also denying us the right to feel our true feelings. And I believe Sakura was right to question what purpose exists in all of this, and to desire meaning that would never be granted by the greater world and its systems. But I don't believe that life truly is meaningless or that we must necessarily comply with despair and fall to it. I believe that despite it all, what is right and beautiful in this world, simply existing and everything around us, gives it meaning, and the purpose of our lives is to share that with others. By choosing to venture out into this uprooting, confusing, and uncertain world and connect with others, we can take it apart and create something new, something collective, informed by desire to know what is right and good, what is human and joyful. Will doing so eliminate suffering? No, because it will always be beside us. There will always be agonizing weights pushed upon us by others in our world, and many of them will be incomprehensible. We will be forced to accept that we don't and never will know everything, and lives will be needed to keep ourselves going at times. We may not break past the repetitions of modern life anytime soon, either, just by questioning it and observing it. We most certainly cannot just facts and logic our way into joy. But observation and a love for the blessings that we observe is the first step to changing it all. Look around and find what is still right in this world, grasp onto it and create meaning out of it, and tell that meaning to others so that they may know right still exists in this world because they may not feel like it does. Do so that we all may act upon it together and build a more collective world. Because though life is cursed, it's also blessed, and those blessings exist to be loved and upheld by all. At the end of it all, do I recommend playing the very original Tsui no Sora? And the answer to that question is, I honestly don't know, but I do think the game proposes a lot of interesting ideas and has a darker framing to it that is very distinct from what Tsukaji would write in later works. I also find it to often come off as immature and undercooked. That said, I do think if you temper your expectations, you wouldn't be wrong to begin your KeroQ journey here. Not only because of how short it is, coming out to around 5 or 6 hours in total, but because pretty much everything the studio made from here on is, in some way, building off of it, either by directly calling back to its ideas and responding, or through DNA passed down from title to title. And to best explain that, I'm going to let TNS99 mega fan and lead fan translator Kakeda Sky take over for a little bit.
Tsui no Sora's presence lingers in every subsequent Tsukaji work immediately following its release. In fact, it would be no mistake to suggest the trajectory of his output shifts entirely towards rejecting the angry, confused, and nihilistic notions about the world that Tsui no Sora writhes around in. This philosophical reassessment comes as early as Nijue, the story of the cursed Ronin Futatsukage Sogen, a man unsure of where his purpose lies beyond the blade, but is unwavering still in his dedication to it, and through it, the continuation of his corporeal life. The Tsui no Sora connections grow stronger still in KeroQ's next release, the Moeko Company series, led by protagonist Kanzaki Takahiro, a character intended to take after Yukito a great deal. Although much of the exterior influence on Moekan comes from contemporary Moge titles such as One and Canon, it is in its exploration of life, the confines of existence, the whereabouts of the soul, and most especially in its appraisal of the value of impermanence, where Moekan takes the most after its Denpa older brother. See, Moekan takes place in an alternate timeline, clearly unlike our own, in which cryptocurrency and anarcho-capitalism are running the world upside down, turning the whole world clean-cut and corporate. It's through the eyes of a man who's been fed frozen dinner his whole life that Moekan's fruit analogy finds its place. After all, when Takahiro partakes in eating fresh, organic fruit, he recognizes a beauty and flavor unlike any frozen offering he's ever been served. And yet, because it's an organic existence, it is subject to rotting, withering away, and returning to nothing. But it is only because it lives, because it runs that risk, that the fruit tastes so sweet. Takehiro's mindset on the matter is brought to a natural conclusion in the most curious of all stories located on the Moeko Company fan disc, Moekasu. The final story included is 2563 no Sora, the tale of one strange night upon island number 2563, killing my business and business is good, in which Takahiro and his maid staff are confronted by the many members of the Tsui no Sora ensemble. What is so curious about this encounter, though, is the state of the Tsui no Sora cast as they arrive. Takaji and Riruru appear to have successfully completed their goals. Zagoro has been reborn as Angel Advise, having saved Elohimuro, and perhaps strangest of all, it is Ayana who expresses some lingering discontent, perhaps some longing to return to an imperfect world for reasons that even she does not seem to fully grasp herself. And so conflict arises. After all, the Moeko games are indulgently chuny in the very best way, and the Moekon and Tsui no Sora cast start to duke it out. Takaji is left to confront Takahiro alone, and thus a conflict of ideals arises. Takaji's resolve, an ardent and proven dedication to nihilism and salvation through the permanent, must answer to Takahiro's, an adoration and acceptance of the impermanence in all things. This battle is on many levels the resolution to the first 5 years of Skaji's catalog, and as Takaji smiles wistfully, remarking how much Takahiro has reminded him of his beloved Yukito, Skaji's answer is clear. Takaji and co. are whisked away from the island, and at last, Skaji has seen something worth believing in, the fleeting and transient beauty of all things, the wonder found in the everyday. See, here's the thing. Tsui no Sora is not just the backbone for the remaining N-Sky series, but that of the entirety of Skaji's catalog. Later titles such as Tosui Kitan and H2O Footprints in the Sand continue to dwell and expand upon Skaji's ongoing rebuttal of his initial mission statement. He has stated outright that SubaHibi and the Sakura no series exist as direct response to Tsui no Sora. In spite of his embarrassment at that game, which he made at such a vulnerable and volatile point in his career, he clearly understands its importance. To be blunt, playing any other Karamakura title before Tsui no Sora is like grasping at answers before you've even understood the initial question. You simply cannot appreciate a response without having first digested the prompt.
I feel I really have to hammer this in, given this game's importance. I urge you not to take my lukewarm reception with it as a turn-off and trying it out yourself. Though, as this video goes up, it might not be super easy to get a hold of, as it's become horrendously inaccessible by legal means over the years. The original box release goes for well over 20,000 yen, the budget release over 15,000 yen, and the SubaHibi 10th anniversary box set, which includes it, goes for over 70,000 yen. It does seem like it's going to get one more shot at life with the newly announced SubaHibi 15th anniversary set, but that is still 20,000 yen. Why is this game not on digital distribution? Why is it not freeware? I don't know.
Look, to cover my ass, I'm not going to tell you to source a download of Tsui no Sora, but you may or may not have an interest in playing this game when it's available in a significantly more accessible form, and you, as a person with free will and agency, have the ability to make your own decision as to whether or not you desire to check it out in that form instead of giving a scalp or 20,000 yen. You know, hypothetically, for the sake of argument. Still, I can at least say that I'm happy I managed to get this game running and read through it, because I did find it to be an overall fascinating experience. It's also probably the most compelling and completed the Denpa Big Free by itself, even if it doesn't have as strong of an atmosphere as Sayo Oshi or the same weird ambition factor as Jisatsu 101. On the whole, Tsui no Sora is a decent package that presents a number of interesting ideas and captures a very specific mindset, the feeling that the world is hopeless and that escape only exists in death, that all that has ever been and all there ever will be is uncertain and unclear, and that all we can do is lie to ourselves to drift for our days, looking for fragments of happiness. While I am far beyond that point in my life, I am glad that I got a chance to reflect on it, and to know that despite all this darkness, brightness still exists in the world. Wait, I forgot to talk about the OVA. SubaHibi Funny Moments 2025. Okay, that's it. Bye. End credits.